God angry and sending pain and suffering, because you've done something wrong. I'm not talking about that kind of punitive justice. I'm
Right.
talking about restorative
Right.
or some sort of justice that involves the good of the whole. And I think that's what at the heart of Black Lives Matter is about. That
Right. Right.
love
Right.
means that you look for the good of those, everyone, but especially the oppressed, those
Exactly.
who are pushed to the
That's
margins, those who are victimized. And so, yes, that it applies to important social issues like
yes.
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, that's right. And it's this old idea: if I value free speech, I've got to give you free speech in order to have free speech myself. So when you use the word oppressed, that's the word I really want to try to get at. To see an oppressed people and to liberate them from that oppression is an expression of love that actually is self-loving in that same space, right? That's actually as loving for me as it is for the people that are oppressed when I bring them to the place of release and freedom.
Yeah, sometimes that's hard to feel. If
Mm,
you're the person kind of who's on top of the heap, who's getting the advantages of the system, like, I'm a white male in the United
mm,
States. I've had lots of advantages.
right.
Um,
Don't even recognize
when
them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Often I don't know what they are, but I
Yeah.
could point out some that I'm conscious of as well.
Right. Right.
And sometimes when there's an upheaval and there's a push toward justice, those of us who have some degree of power are reticent to give it up because it feels like it's not being fair. Like, I didn't do anything bad to get to this position. It was
Right.
just kind of handed to me. And it feels awkward. And it's often only as you begin to think through it and work with people who need this justice, who need this elevation of status, that you begin to see it really is for your own good.
Right.
That there's some negative things that are happening as a part of your world that you didn't see how it was linked to this injustice in the systems around you.
Right.
But it's harder for some people to see at first glance.
That's right, and I really appreciate you saying that. The issues very much there are identity issues. It's what I've invested my understanding of who I am in. I think I made the comment in a video a couple of weeks back that the extent to which I refuse positive change is the extent to which I've invested my own identity in the way things are now. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
people don't even recognize that this is not about objective good. This is about how I know myself, which is why I resist things. Anyway, all of that to say, this comes down to this word essential, because I think people in vernacular or common usage tend to use the word essential to mean very, very important. But if it doesn't happen, there might be other options. We can find another way, right? Which is absolutely not what the word literally essential means. Essential is responding to the word essence, which is the heart core. So when you say essential kenosis, or this is essentially who God is, you don't giving an expression to say this is one way of looking at God. You're saying there isn't any other way of looking at God, at least to be consistent within these constructs, right?
That's right. Yeah. Another way to look at it is ask the question, to what degree does God have freedom to do things? Now,
Mm,
there have been some Christians who've wanted to say God's free to do anything God wants to do. God can say, this existing all the time really sucks. I'm going to stop existing tomorrow.
mm.
I mean, very few people actually think that, but some people think that God's freedom is such that God could freely choose to stop existing.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm making the claim here that God's love, which is self-giving and others empowering,
Mm,
is God's very nature. It's God's essence, to use the word
mm,
here.
mm,
And that means God must necessarily love us and all
mm,
creation.
mm.
Now, I think God has freedom in choosing how to create moment by moment. But the idea that God's going to love every single person and every single creature, in fact, in my view, is something that is necessary or essential to who God is. And
Mm.
it's to put it philosophically, it's who God is by definition.
Right.
And that's an important claim, I think, if we're going to take the themes of love and make them first in God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome, Tom. That's so great. I'd love to go down the rabbit hole of creation at this point and look at how God is present in every piece of it, but I guess we don't have time to look at that. So let me put a couple of ideas here together and see how you might be able to respond to them. There's a theological word that talks about this idea of evil. It's theodicy, and I think that's an important part of this process. But at the end of the day, it's trying to explain how there is evil, right? In the essential kenosis, God can't perspective. How do you avoid the idea that this is simply us trying to rescue God from being blamed for bad stuff? And at the end of the day, when we have arrived at that space, we've moved away from this omnipotence idea, but how have we not moved to a place of impotence?
Yeah, great question. I really do. So theodicy is the activity to try to justify or explain why someone believes in God despite the kind of world we live in that has these evils in it that I call genuine evils. And my proposal is to say that God simply can't control others, can't single-handedly stop things from happening in the world, not only amongst free will creatures, but against smaller entities and even the micro units of reality. It does sound to some people when they first hear this, like I have just described the wimp of the universe, you know, an impotent God, this little weakling who's on the sidelines sort of with pom-poms cheering us on, but not really doing anything, not having any power. That's not the God I think exists. In fact, I even used the word almighty to talk about this God's power. I think God is almighty in three senses. God is the source of might for everything that occurs in the universe. God is mightier than anyone or anything in the universe. God has no rivals, to quote the psalmist. And God provides the power to every single one of us. God exerts might, God provides might, and God is the mightiest. I think God can have that kind of power and yet be unable to control anyone or anything. So this isn't an impotent God. This isn't a God sitting on the sidelines or cheering, you know, from the sidelines. This is a God in the game, active, always influential at all levels to the utmost, but never in a controlling way. And when I mean the word control, I mean being the only actor bringing about some kind of result.
Right. That's fantastic, Tom. I love that. I just as an aside, just to recognize a space in my own life, happened to sit under the teaching of one Dr. Chester Mulder back in the 80s, who's now passed from this life, a wonderful, beautiful person. I didn't realize how much he had liberated me by the comment that I'm going to make until years later when I was looking back on it. But I remember him saying, don't worry about thinking about the omni categories. Recognize that God is everything that God needs to be in any given context in order to be God. And that so liberated me then to be able to explore the concept of who God might be. And then in that space, when you come to the conclusion that God is love, all of those things feed into a representation of his love. I think probably the one that's easiest to put, well, at least clear, is the issue of sovereignty. Many people use the idea of God's sovereignty as the ultimate expression of who God is, that God is in control, he's in charge. It seems to me that if you're going to have love as the center, then some way sovereignty has to slip in under that and reinforce that. Are you able to speak to that idea at all?
Yeah, you know, when I say it philosophically, I say this: love is logically prior to all the other attributes in God's nature. When I say it more in the sort of a laity kind of I say we should take love and make it conceptually first in God, and then try to understand the other beliefs we have about God in light of love.
Right.
So that means, as you pointed out, that when we talk about God's power, if we have claims that about God's power that are going to clash or come in contradiction with love, then I think power has to be rethought. Again, I don't think we should throw out power entirely, but we should rethink it in light of love. We could say this about other attributes. There's some in our tradition, the holiness tradition, who understand God's holiness in a way that God can't be in the presence of anything that's sinful. I don't think it's a faithful rendering of our tradition, but that's the way they understand holiness, as purity, and God, has to turn God's back on any sin unless Jesus somehow comes and rescues and stands between whatever. I think that way of thinking about holiness contradicts love. And so we need to rethink holiness in light of this understanding of love, which, as you rightly pointed out, I think it involves intentional action in relational response with others to promote overall well-being, to promote the good, the blessed life, the abundant life. So we should understand God in light of God's love. It doesn't mean that love is the only attribute, but it does, in my view, mean we should understand all the other attributes in light of love.
Right. That's amazingly wonderful. Thanks, Tom. That's brilliant. Let me begin to draw this to a close with moving from the theoretical constructs. The best part of this idea of God for me is that it resists staying at the theoretical, right? It moves into the practical. And what in the church, Christians probably of all religious faiths desire to see others believe what they believe at the heart level. We frame our sense of the eternities in certain faith constructs. Whether that's right or not remains to be seen. But we do tend to do that, right? We see our mission as bringing other people to see the world from our perspective. I want us to then move into this space of the mission of the church, how we conceive of what it is. Having people hold a faith construct in this space, I think actually is important. But it's it has to be consistent. The way we go about that has to be consistent with these ideas. So can you help me make that transition from an idea to a practice?
Yeah. So in terms of missional thinking, I think missional work involves believing God is already present and active in all situations, in all people, not necessarily meaning that all people are understanding God or all situations rightly reflect God's love, but God's already there, present and active. And it means that we need to listen and be affected by those with whom we engage. The idea that the missionaries came into the context with all the answers and the people were in darkness with absolutely no truth at all, that doesn't fit in this kind of a concept. So we engage in a missional kind of way, first and foremost in terms of love, and love involves being affected by others. It means listening to others. It means seeing truth and value in other traditions. I'll say, I'm known to say a few controversial things. Let me say one right now. I'm not a Christian just because I think it's the grooviest religion. I'm a follower of Jesus because he's the one who captures my imagination with the themes of love. I find love in other religious traditions. I don't think Christianity is the only one that talks about well-being. Now, I happen to think it talks about it best. That's from my particular perspective. So that's why I'm a part of the Christian tradition and try to follow Jesus. But I begin to see connection with other faith traditions around the issues of love. And I'm quite willing to point those out and celebrate what we can share in common in terms of love. And this not only includes other religious traditions, this includes non-religions, paganism or
Right.
sort of general culture.
Right.
But being open to and acknowledging the truth and love in others doesn't mean that all religions are equal, that I have to think, Jesus is the same as Hitler or whatever. I can have particular aspects of Christianity or faith that just entice me and inspire me. And then because of that, privilege Christianity, while at the same time is appreciating the truth and the love I see in other places.
Right. Exactly. I love that. I really love it. I have journeyed a little bit alongside some of the atheistic thoughts over the last few years, and one of the struggles that I see happening from that perspective is the articulation that, so from a Christian perspective, we might say the atheist is the atheist because they're filled with hatred and anger and
Not usually.
rejection. But it's not true, is it? And so,
not most of the time. Yeah.
No, that's right, exactly. And so one of the privileges of opening the mind up is to recognize actually God in that space, that walking with, drawing people to ideas that represent who he is. And here's the thing that goes along with the uncontrolling God that I think is really, really important. If I say to you now, Tom, you're wrong, and then you start trying to tell me why you're right, but I keep on resisting that, we're going to move apart, right? Yeah. It's just, you can't keep that dialogue. But if I say, I'm not sure I get that, but I think I understand where you're coming from, help me to understand that. And then I start to value pieces of what you're saying, we move closer. And while I become more available to your perspective, you also become more available to my perspective. And that maybe it's true. In fact, I'm convinced it is, but let's use the word maybe. Maybe that's the evangelistic device, that as we engage people, love people, embrace people, and journey with people, they come to a space, I think C.S. Lewis said his imagination was baptized. So he started thinking in Christian constructs because of that journey of love and grace.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Is it all right if I jump back to something that you said earlier before we close here? Because I wanted to make another point. Because you shared a little bit about your own journey. And one of the things you talked about, or a word that I heard you say, is the idea of being significant or valuable or worthwhile. And I want to point to another, I think, asset or advantage the uncontrolling love of God, or the God can't view, has. And this is the idea that God actually needs you and me for love to win. You see, a lot of theologies have said that God invites us into the work of what God is doing in the world, but is sort of in the back of their theological structure. They have a God who can control and who can fix things single-handedly. And even though God is inviting us, according to this view, God could just get the job done, even if we don't cooperate. But in my perspective, this uncontrolling love perspective, God's love seeks, calls, invites us to cooperate. And if we don't, then love can't win to the fullest degree. Now, for some people, that is very alarming, because what matters to them most is that God wins at the end, even if it has to be through absolute force, power, fiat, sovereign control. But if that's the case, then what you and I do really doesn't matter. In my view, what you and I do really matters. You and I are significant, worthwhile partners with the God of the universe. And to me, that just jacks me up. It gets me so excited, because that means that this interview we're doing right now isn't just some sort of piddly old thing that just, we threw it out there, but God doesn't really care ultimately. No, this can actually be part of God's work in the world. God actually needs for us to act in these kinds of ways in order for what Christians call the kingdom of God, or God's reign, to actually come to its fullness. And that excites me.
Wow. Yeah, that excites me too. I live in a space now where I am convinced that that the extent to which we embrace and move in this direction is the extent to which the church becomes relevant to the world in which we live. The extent to which we hold on to structures that are manipulative, controlling, marginalizing is the extent to which we'll continue down the track of irrelevance. And I take your warning, Tom. I think it's right that maybe ultimately the church does become so marginalized because it wants to hold on to structures that ultimately just don't work, that it ceases to have relevance at all. So that is a warning. Thank you for that.
Yeah. You know, I don't know about you, but I grew up in churches where we use that word revival a lot. And that word usually meant that you went to the altar and sort of regave your heart to Jesus, and you were kind of on a spiritual high, and you were going to go out and fly straight. But I wonder if revival can mean something like the church and those of us who are part of it, letting down these walls and barriers, not trying to be controlling, to use this language again, and being open to where the Spirit is moving, even if it's moving outside our walls.
Right. No, I love that, Tom. I love that. Well, Tom, one of my great regrets in life, and actually is every time I think about it, it's a regret, is that we have not had long periods of time to sit and chat together. We had a couple where it's been half an hour here or there, but I would have loved to have walked in life with you over a significant period of time. I love the way that it seems to me our hearts beat together. And
I feel the same way about you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it enormously. I think this has tremendous value for us, and it'll help us continue to walk in the garden. So
Excellent.
thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity. I've enjoyed our conversation.